So in this video I'm going to paint these two pears here that you see. This is the finished painting, and I had actually started this painting 6 months ago or something, maybe longer than that, and the painting had dried. I'd started to paint it and got distracted and forgot about it, and it was sort of half painted. Decided I should finish it, and I filmed myself, and I'm going to give some commentary. The one thing I'm going to be talking a lot about in this video is painting texture on a surface, and that goes for really, it can be applied to anything, but I'm going to talk about painting texture, maintaining the abstraction while you do that, and also talk about modifying your colors as you paint instead of trying to pre-mix all the various shades in these pears. And you can see the oranges and the greens, all the variation. Instead of trying to pre-mix all those variations, what I did was just mixed a single row of colors of some greens, and then I'm going to modify those colors as I paint. So without further ado, and stay tuned at the end of the video. We've got some reject items at Geneva Fine Art that we're going to sell for 50% off. So stay tuned at the end of the video if you want to hear about reject items for sale at Geneva Fine Art. And without further ado, here's me painting the two pears. So the very first thing I did when I painted this was mix a row of color, and the row of color is just the straight greens. I didn't have any variation, even though there was a lot of variation in the pears and variation in the there was reds and greens and oranges and everything else, but I didn't worry about that. I just mixed a row of greens and tried to stay in the sort of basic color of the pears without worrying about the oranges or the color shifts. So the very first thing I'm doing here is going ahead and mixing some of the oranges, and I'm re-wetting this part in the when I say re-wetting, what I mean is this pear was already painted, and everything that you see painted there has already been dry for several months, and so I'm coming back in and re-wetting the edge that I'm going to blend into. And while I do that, I try to keep it a little messy and a little noisy, and I try not to just for sure don't want to create just some solid line. So by putting in a little bit of noise and making it a rough edge instead of a hard edge, it all works, and there's not this delineation between the dry area and the wet area that's visible. It's a lot harder to do in a face, but in something like this, it's a cinch, because just by kind of messing that edge up a little bit, you don't see that division line where you started with the fresh paint. So one of the things, I don't put any color checking. I do some color checking when I painted this, but I just don't show any of it because I didn't have the camera set up to show it. But the other thing is, and the reason I didn't bother too much showing you when I check colors, is I don't check colors nearly as much as you should if you're starting off. In fact, I don't check my colors very much at all, but that's just because I've trained my eye to see the color from years of checking colors, as a portrait artist, and especially working from life, where the color checker, it trains you to see color, and which is what I preach a lot. But this is a learning method, the method that I teach. It's not a method necessarily that you'll stick with for the rest of your life, but it does teach you to see color. So if you're painting this, if you were to be painting this painting and you're starting out, I would encourage you to check every stroke that you paint, meaning don't just guess at your colors, but go over and investigate by if you're working from life, you can use a color checker. You can make one yourself. I've got a video on how to make a color checker. Just go search how to make a color checker, draw, mix, paint. I'm sure it'll come up. But anyway, and I also sell them at Geneva Fine Art. But you can, if you're working from life, you can use a color checker. If you're working from a photograph, just laminate it, and you can check your colors right on the photo itself. Um, so that only, I'm just telling you that, you know, if you solving the color question, trying to figure out what the right color is and where colors go, is something that if you do check your colors, anybody can learn how to do that. It's not as if I have some magic talent to be able to see color. That you can learn how to do. And I've got another video. I'm not trying to send you off to all my other videos, but in this video I don't teach you know, hardcore color mixing, but I have other videos that I do. But anybody can learn to mix colors. And right now I'm just re-wetting the black areas with fresh paint. And you know, by pushing the background in there on that stem, I can redefine the line, which is one of the reasons I like to have background around an object when I paint it, because it allows you to bump the line one way or the other by painting the background in. So as far as painting texture goes, as I move along here, what the number one thing is that you don't blend, and you know, I have some videos where I talk about the importance of not blending while you work. And actually at the end of those videos I say it's perfectly fine to blend, but there's a time for it. And the best time to blend, if you do blend, is after you've covered your canvas with paint. You know, once I've filled in this pear and covered the canvas, then that would be the time to blend. But I actually do pretty much no blending at all. I mean, there's some unintentional blending that I do in this pear where I'm, you know, laying in color, and you could call that blending. But what I mean by blending is taking your brush and just turning it into a smooth transition, which is what you see with your eye when you look at the pears. You see a smooth surface. You know, if you ignore the dots, you know, on the skin, and that's what you don't want to do. You always want to have a texture on your surface. It doesn't matter what it is. And this is the sort of, you know, magical thing about painting that's really doesn't even make sense. But one of the reasons I wanted to, you know, for you to look at the finished painting and to decide whether you like it is because one of the things I never do in this video is paint all the little spots, or to turn this into a smooth, you know, like pear skin is a very smooth surface, but instead I'm painting a sort of chunky, edgy, textured surface, which is nothing like the pear. And that's the sort of, you know, magical thing that's really, if you think about it, makes no sense whatsoever. But that is that when you paint a texture on something, and you know, there are people out there who you know, love and appreciate you know, photorealism, and there's nothing wrong with that. I don't have any problem, you know, whatsoever with, you know, if that's what you like and that's what you're after. So I'm not talking about that where you can blow it up and see every little teeny thing. But in painting in this sort of brushy way, which what you do is you create a surface texture. And the way you create that surface texture is by not blending. And you'll notice I'm very careful throughout this painting to lay my color down, but to not blend it all smooth, but to leave it. If you look real sharp, you'll see little edginess to it. There's a sort of a general abstractness to the way that I lay in the color. But as long as I lay the color in an abstract way, and not like stroke, 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 one after another next to each other, but in sort of this, you know, mixed up, random sort of way, which I call abstract. As long as you paint in an abstract way and you don't blend up your colors, you can create any texture you want on the surface. Some people have a certain brushwork that creates one type of texture. Another person has a jabby brushwork. So there's all kinds of brushwork, and it really doesn't matter as long as it's abstract and as long as you don't blend your texture away so that you can see the brushwork in the surface. And it's got a little, you can see the little edges of the brush strokes, and you can see that it's not all blended, all smooth together. That texture can represent anything. It can represent a pear, it can represent even smooth cloth. I mean, it's really an amazing thing how if you get the values right and you get the color right, you only have to put any sort of texture will do. It doesn't matter what the object is. And you'll see that. I mean, when I finish these pears, it certainly isn't smooth. It certainly doesn't have a, it didn't paint any of the spots at all. And yet, it comes across as pears. So one of the things I've done here is, I'm modifying my colors as I paint, and I'm not showing you every time I go to the palette, but basically I'm, just playing with the color and mixing it and modifying it as I need it. And it's really pretty easy to do that. Once you have that nice row of good value steps, it's really easy to just push it this way or that way. One of the things I don't show, just in the interest of time, is I don't show you a lot of the footage of me, playing with the colors on the palette. And so it's something that I'm doing quite a bit of. And I've talked about this before in my videos, but most of your work in a painting is in brush preparation and filling your brush with the right color. And the painting time doesn't take as much time as the time it takes in preparing your colors and in playing with your color and filling your brush, with the right color. So it's all about values. And so I'm always, whenever I see a value problem, I go in there and fix it, like I'm doing now. And one of the things about painting edges, you'll notice, there's a time for a hard edge and there's a time for a soft edge. Now what I'm painting right here is just trying to get that transition to be a little more noisy, and noticing some of my mistakes, going in and lightening up the glow there. And I'm very sure, always being very careful not to pollute my shadows. If you look at that shadow, both on the bottom of the pear and in the shadow area, I never allow my brush to stray and go in there and milk those colors out, because it'd be so easy to do. And this is another reason why you should spend all your time in brush preparation, because the less or the more accurate your colors are as you lay them in, the less you have to play with your painting, and the less likely you are to muddy up all your colors and blend them all together. Colors should stand separately from each other. I mean, one little brush stroke across that shadow, that red shadow on the pear would milk it up. Just a single stroke And so as you paint, you always, always have to be very conscious of the, not polluting your shadows, not milking them up, not letting the colors that you originally put in to slowly get milky as you play and you play. And so that's another reason not to blend. And if you do feel like you have to blend, and there are times when you just have to blend. I mean, when you paint an egg, you have to do a little bit of blending. Um, and so when you do blend, always make sure that you um, save that for the end. Get the canvas covered completely first. And it's much easier to blend at that point, and you'll make far fewer errors if you wait until the canvas is covered before you start to blend. And this is a Geneva paint that I'm using. It's the paint that I manufacture myself here in Austin, Texas. And it's got the medium already in it. It doesn't have solvents in it. It's just oil paint, and these are this is the essential palette. We have some other colors that we sell, but this is just the 5 essential colors that I think I use in 98% of my paintings. I don't use any other colors other than these 5 colors. The black is made by mixing 60% blue with about 40% burnt umber, and so I'm intentionally putting the paint on thin here, and that's why you can see the canvas showing through. I like to, as I start to sketch things in, I use as little paint as possible until I'm confident that the shape is right, because it's real easy to bump it around if you're just putting a real thin coat on. And I always try to put just enough paint to cover the canvas, but not any more than that. And so I could use, fill my brush up with more color and get full coverage, but I'm just sort of scraping it in, trying to look at my shape before I, really lay the color down. And I actually got the shape on this pear completely wrong. I don't know what I was doing. Sometimes I hold my head off to the side for when I'm filming, and I can't see some of these shapes as well, but I straightened it out later. Wet oil paint, especially if it stays wet, and the Geneva paint that I use dries in 5 days on the canvas, even burnt umber. Some of the colors will take even longer than that. We don't put any dryers in them. So I love working wet and wet, and it's just it's very a lot more forgiving when you make mistakes. People think that oil paint is is messy and hard to work with because it dries slow or whatever it is, but it's actually the other way around. Because it's wet, you can take a paper towel and wipe it off anytime you want. And you can also paint wet paint on top of wet paint, which is something people don't know until they've done it. But you'll see me push the lines around all the time by just, either painting another color on top or, painting one color into another like I'm doing now. So you might call that blending, what I just did, but I'm really just painting the one color into another. And you'll notice, once I paint a stroke, I don't play with it very much. I just, I put it in, and I may get a little bit of blendism like I am there, but I'm just, joining the lines together, and I'm not going stroke, 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 back and forth, trying to make it look smooth or pretty, because that's how you kill all the color. You can look into that shadow line even now, and you can see that the colors are separate, and they're not all milked together. Especially those shadow colors, those have to stand out. And the only way you can, paint like this is that if you have your colors right. And so this is not something that's not attainable. Anybody can learn to do this, and it doesn't even take years. You just have to paint a couple paintings and check your colors off of those, either off of a laminated photo or using a color checker that you can make yourself or whatever. You got to set up your lights and have, you don't want to have glare all over your color checker. There's a few things you need to know how to use one. But, working off of a laminated photo is easy. You can just wipe it right on the photo. And so anybody can learn to mix colors just like I've mixed them. There's really, there's nothing to it. Just go watch one of my videos on how to match one color to another. And anybody can learn to do it. And then the next thing is just to check your colors a lot. So here I am, and you can see I'm playing with that shadow. I'm building away from it, but you'll notice I never let my brush stray into that shadow area and milk up those wonderful shadow colors. So just modifying the color. Obviously just shifting it in a blue-green direction. I don't remember what I'm doing here. But the point is that, let me just talk about these colors. The reason it's so much easier, because I've mixed all those values, I can sort of forget about value. And if I want to change a color, the value's right there, and I can make a value adjustment very easily. But if I want to shift it toward the, say, purple or the orange or the yellow or any direction I want, I can just go over there and mix it right into those green colors that I've got, and then just move up and down the line to get my values. So I start to throw in some orange, and I decide, well, it's, maybe I lightened it up too much or something. Well, I can just go grab a darker version of the color and just mix some of that into it. So, but I would absolutely, and this is even if you pre-mix as many colors as you possibly can, I still would absolutely encourage you to play with your color and on your palette and modify it just as I've done here. Don't be afraid to sort of mess up your colors once you've mixed them. The messier your palette is, the more color choices you have as you paint. When I look down and try to figure out what color I need in my brush, and I look at a messy palette, I've got a lot of choices. So the other thing I do, and I've talked about this in other videos, but is I try to work dark to light, and I didn't do it perfectly, but in general I absolutely try to work dark to light. As I've done. I'm still holding off on the highlight, but I've built in all my shadows and everything else. And it's much easier to work light colors into dark colors, and it tends to look more natural than trying to go the other way around. If you gave me a painting and you had painted in all the light areas and I had to go in and try to put in the dark areas, that would be a real chore. But to do it the other way around is much easier. So, and also visually it helps you to sort of see the shape develop. If you're just putting in spots all over the place, you don't really see it until the very end. So I work dark to light. It definitely is easier in my opinion. So there I have modified some of the color there. I decided it needed some pink in it. And I'm very much being careful not to let these colors mix, but to let them stand separate from each other. So you've got the pinkish colors and then the other colors right next to it. And that always looks a lot better than if you sort of mix it all up together. Now I'm just trying to get a little bit of noise in there. It's, and again, going back to the texture, this texture is not the same as the pear, even the nature of the spots. When it gets into that sort of detail, when you're standing 10 feet away or even 6 feet away from the painting, the viewer doesn't care about the detail. They care about the values, and they care about the general shapes, but they care about the big picture. Nobody ever thinks about the spots. And that's why I wanted to ask you in the beginning when I showed you the painting. You'll notice I never paint all those little spots in. And if you look at it, you start to think they belong, because you start to use your critical eye and you start thinking, well, he should have painted the spots, or whatever. Or, I want to see the spots. But I just, if you don't think about it, then you don't think about it. And certainly, Sargent and John Singer Sargent, and I could give you a long list of the great artists that would never get into that sort of detail. And there were artists, still life artists, that do, and if you're into the photorealistic thing, that's totally cool. But just in terms of this style of painting, where you have, where you can see the brushwork and everything, you just never get into that sort of detail. If you're painting strawberries, you don't paint in all the little seeds. You put in a texture that's any old texture you want, and then you make sure your values are right. So if your values are right, like I've been very careful that all my values are right, the glow in the bottom of the pear is not brighter than it should be. All my values are correct. And if your values are correct, you can just put in any old texture you want. I call it painting ugly even. If you look at in my workshops that I teach here in Austin, I have private classes that I teach, and the students always, they'll be painting, say, a portrait in the portrait class, and they are never happy with the way they've painted their hair. And I always pull up a Sargent painting and say, take a look at this Sargent painting. Here, I'll show it to you. And look at the close-up shot of her hair, and notice that it doesn't look at all like hair, but nobody cares because all the values are right. And so that's the observation I've made about painting anything, just like in these pears, is as long as you put in some texture, in other words, leave your edgy brush work in where you can look in there and you can see some texture. And then the other thing is always paint in an abstract way so that your texture has an abstract quality to it, not a regular pattern or anything. And as long as you watch your values and get your values right, you can paint any old texture you want, and it looks great. Just like in these pears, I never went in and painted smooth, glossy skinned pears that had little spots. I painted something completely different. But because the values are right, and because there is a texture, it's not all smooth, then the viewer doesn't care, and they see pears. So it's something that I never really thought about it until several years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. I just noticed that, and I was always painting this way, maybe unconsciously, back when I used to paint loose, but it's just truth. I've noticed, even something like a smooth porcelain statue, I've seen paintings where the artist paints it all chunky and nothing like smooth, not porcelain, but smooth like a polished marble or something. And the painting is nothing like that, but nobody cares, because if your values are right and your colors are right, then everybody sees what it is. And but you do have to have some texture on there. If you smooth it all up, then it somehow has a different quality and it can look plastic. Or if you paint somebody's skin and you over blend it, it looks like a mannequin skin. It looks artificial. And that's, I guess, because of just everything has texture on it. And here I'm getting my line all crooked and wrong, and I'll end up bumping it around and straightening it out. But mainly as I'm painting in this silver, I'm thinking about trying to get my values right. And I know I keep repeating that, but that's, as long as you do that, you can just get away with anything. I mean, even this silver, if you really look at it, up close. The texture, you can see some brushwork in there, and it's not really like a silver container, but because the values are right, including all the reflections and everything, then the viewer just sees it as reflective metal. It's the magic of painting, I guess. So I've got my values in on this silver thing. I'm still trying to put in all the little, important lines, like the little reflection there and whatever else it is. And then sooner or later I'll get around to straightening my lines up, which goes back to what I said before, that painting oil wet and wet is a very, you can fix errors, you can fix your mistakes. It's not something that's set in stone. If you don't like a color, if something looks too yellow, you can put the opposite in there, and which is what I do. If you look at the bottom of the bottom edge of the silver there, then the reflection, the purples and the blues and all that, I left them separate. I don't think any of those colors are exactly like that, but I might have decided my color was too orange, so I put in some blue and left it separate, and the dance of the two colors together works. So now I'm fixing my line, or fixed my line there on the silver there. And now I'm just filling in the background. And when I did this background, I didn't really know what I was going to do. A lot of times I'll do this when I don't really know what direction to take the color or whatever. I just mix my color up on the canvas instead of mixing it on my palette. And then it gives me a little more variation in the color, and maybe something interesting will come out of it. But I wasn't really trying for anything. I just didn't want to paint it solid black. So I ended up just putting in this, knowing that it was too light, but that I would come back in with some black and tone it down and just sort of create a mess back there, which is much more likely to give me something that's not contrived than if I had, gone in and painted it in the way I wanted to paint it. Now when I do this back edge, I can get away with blending this edge because the burnt umber is such an orangey color, which is, orange is the opposite of milk. Milk is sort of a bluish color. And so by taking just pure burnt umber and blending it right into that table color, it gives me a nice color, and I'm letting the canvas show through as well to give me some relief. Which is another thing I do quite a bit, is I'll sort of, if you slide your brush sideways, you can sort of scrape canvas off, and you'll get a little bit of canvas showing through your paint. Like in the bottom of the left pear, there's a lot of canvas showing through. But I do that intentionally, and it's one of the reasons I like painting on a stained canvas. So I painted that reflection a little crooked, and now I'm straightening it up and pushing it over to the left a little bit, which is going back to what's nice about painting. And there's the finished painting once again for you to look at. And that's it for the painting. Oh, and before you go, I want to tell you, go to GenevaFineArt.com, and we've got our artist palettes that we make. We started selling them several months ago, and we have some rejects that have small blemishes and cosmetic, this or that, but they're still functionally work fine. But we're going to be selling all of those for 50% off while supplies last. So go to GenevaFineArt.com to check that out, as well as the paint that I use to paint with, and a number of other things that we have for sale. And thank you guys for watching.